Welcome to the Delight in the Limelight live stream show. I'm your host, Linda Uglow, a speaking confidence coach and author of the book Delight in the Limelight and host of the Delight in the Limelight podcast. I am the guests I bring on are here to help you transform your experience from dread to loving it instead, whether it's on stage, on camera, in the media, or the meeting room. And today we're talking about the work stress speaking confidence connection. So people come to me wanting to feel more relaxed and comfortable when they speak. And one question I ask them is, how easeful are your days? And often they say, not very. Well, if life is hectic and you're feeling frantic and frazzled, it's natural that you bring that same energy to the speaking that you do. So let's start toning that anxiety down. Today on this show, I'm joined by Nina Nesdoly, a work stress and burnout prevention speaker and researcher. She draws on her interdisciplinary background in organizational behavior and neuroscience to examine work-related stress from both management and physiological perspectives. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited to dive into this with you today because I feel that ultimately this is what people want to feel is more easeful and more relaxed. And this is your field of expertise, obviously. And I think you can shed a lot of light on what people may be struggling with.
I think you're right. I think it's very relevant, especially in the last couple of years. People are dealing with high levels of stress, anxiety, and burnout. And because stress is so central to how our bodies work, how our minds work, and our day-to-day lives, it naturally has a big impact on how we show up in the world, including things like our public speaking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. Just in these few words that you're saying, I feel how grounded and relaxed you are. And I feel like you really kind of embody the work that you do, which is really beautiful to see.
I try to. Sometimes it honestly involves going back to my own notes and my own TikToks to be like, okay, what do I need to do to take care of myself today when things get really hectic? But I have very much incorporated the work that I do into my life and into my own routines. So
Hmm.
I'm very grounded this morning because I was just out at a bachata dance class last night, which is for me one of my favorite ways to relieve stress is to dance. It also gives me a sense of mastery and growth in my personal life that isn't purely focused on work. So feeling great this morning. Nice night of dancing.
Well, I think that's a great thing to point out is, as a tip to find an area where you can relieve stress and where you can feel a sense of mastery that's outside of work, so that you kind of build up that groove in your body and your neurophysiology. I'm just saying these words because it makes sense to me, but to build up that groove so that you feel like you have something to draw on, because unless you have those places that are feeling in the flow and where you feel that sense of ease and relaxation, you may not remember what it feels like, right? To bring it into your speaking confidence.
You're so right. And your body very much adapts to whatever is familiar. So if you are constantly stressed, chronically overwhelmed at work, your physiology is going to match that energy with things like heightened cortisol levels and connections in your brain that will not be as strong or will be stronger, that align more with a stressed, anxious approach to not only work, but life and the world and things that you're doing. So, cultivating experiences outside of work so that you have a baseline for what enjoyment and happiness and having stress relieved feels like can also serve as a really good frame of reference in your day to day for you to notice, hey, I'm really overwhelmed and stressed out right now. That's not how I want to feel. And then you have something that you know you can do that will help with that.
Well, I'm taking this personally as a nudge because dance is my background, dance is my love, and I have not been out dancing for a long time, and I think I could use that. So thank you.
What kind of dance?
Uh well, I'll do any kind of dance, but I improvisational form. So I have a background in dance therapy and love I love like ecstatic dancing or places where I get to do my own thing to music. But I'm happy doing a salsa or just put music on that the beat or the melody or the energy touches me, and I'm the first one out on the dance floor. So, and I feel like I need that. I feel like I need that. So thank you. So let's get into I mean, that's great because I feel like that's a big piece, and it's something that's easy for people to do. But let's get into my framework. As you know, the Inner Freedom Framework has three parts of it, and there are elements that I think that you can add to each one. The first one is reveal and heal. Like, look at what are the root causes of the speaking anxiety, which can be anything from childhood experiences in school or at home where you felt bullied or dismissed or invisible or pressured to perform before you were ready, or any of these things. And I know that you speak about patterns. And I was wondering if you could highlight some of those that may be part of the root causes of speaking anxiety.
I think that some of the patterns that show up in people who are more prone to burnout or really struggling with burnout also align with speaking anxiety. So there are three big patterns that we see in the research, and also I see anecdotally in my work with people, that put people at a higher risk for burnout. And those are type A, perfectionism, and people pleasing. So type A is that very competitive tunnel vision. It's very much me. And it can sound good to have this competitive driven element, but in type A, it becomes detrimental because it can be so much so that people will neglect to take breaks, ask for help. I have in the past been guilty of doing the same work over again 8 or 9 times because I got it in my head that I had to be the one to figure it out all by myself, and wasted many hours of my life that could have been saved if I had just asked for help. With perfectionism, it is this need to be or appear perfect to a standard that is completely unattainable. And with people pleasing, it is being overly concerned with what other people think of us. We want to appear kind, we want to be well liked, we want to avoid conflict with others at the expense of ourselves. So, what these patterns all have in common with respect to stress and burnout is that they often lead to overwork and doing too much in areas that don't serve you. And they're highly focused on what other people think of you. Type A wants to appear accomplished and do the competitive things that are seen as prestigious. Perfectionists want to appear perfect. People pleasers want to appear kind and be well liked. All of these show up in how we're speaking and communicating with others, because if we are driven by wanting to appear those ways, it's going to alter the way that we communicate and the way that we express ourselves. Whether that manifests as being more abrasive because we want people to see how smart we are, we don't want them to recommend a book to us that we wouldn't need to read because we're so accomplished, or it is being overly kind, overly passive in our delivery of something because we don't want to risk upsetting anyone with our opinions or our message. All of these patterns, which often do develop in childhood and carry into adulthood, they basically take us out of being true to ourselves and our own message and what's good for us.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you break it down. I'm not sure if I totally see the separation between type A and perfectionism. Can you kind of separate them a little bit for
Happy
me?
to. Yeah, so I'm very much a type A person, but not much of a perfectionist. So there definitely is a separation there. So with type A, there is this competitive element. You want to win at things, you want to accomplish a lot. Type A individuals will very much get stuck in their own heads and often become very good at neglecting their own signs. So the signs that they need a break, the signs that they're tired, there's this idea that they just need to work harder, to try harder, to prove themselves. So perfectionism and type A do have some crossover in that they're both really manifestations of high achievement or overachievement. But with perfectionism, there is this layer of trying to avoid any chips in the armor. So it's less so the concern with the competitive and I have to push myself as it is the I have to look perfect. I have to be perfect. The work I do has to appear perfect. So perfectionists can fall into traps of not even getting started on projects because they build up this anxiety around wanting to do it perfectly that stops them from even getting started. Whereas the type A people are more likely to jump in and push themselves way past the time sometimes that a project is done, but are not as likely to encounter that element of the need to be perfect stopping them from doing something. So
Yes.
there's some similarities for sure, but I think that that's probably the easiest way to distinguish it is type A's are the I have to push myself harder. Perfectionism is the I have to be and appear perfect, and I won't do things that will risk shattering that image.
hmm Which also, that last thing you said about risking that to shatter that image is similar to I won't risk having people be mad at me of the people pleaser.
Yes, it is. It
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. I like this. It's like really geeking out for me because, I have people who come to me who, maybe they have a lot of people like are really high level in their competency. They may be C-suite or, high level professionals, very ambitious. And yet they suffer from one of these three things at the same time. And I see that I think a lot of it, well, there are lots of different causes. It could be pressure from your parents to get really good grades, or feeling that you are trying to please one of your parents and you never can. And you just keep going and going and trying to, well, maybe they'll, like I had one client whose mother was thrilled every time she won an award or had a high level achievement, but the rest of the time she was treated like garbage. And so she kind of like built up this idea that I have to always be proving my abilities at this high standard. And then there are other people who see doing really well at school as one of the ways that they were able to feel good about themselves because they got praise for it from the teacher or whatever. And they conjoined their sense of self-worth with making the fewest mistakes or making no mistakes at all and being totally perfect.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and maybe also, like, always lining up your ducks in the row, but never really taking big action or, just feeling afraid of anything going out there that may show that they're, um, not perfectly polished. And that makes sense because in school, you get the highest grades for making no mistakes. So if you were one of those kids who grew up able to do that with a particular teacher, it's easy. I mean, not easy. It's not easy, but you become it's like, it's almost like I'm not gonna say addiction, I don't think it's true, but I guess we can become addicted to certain behaviors because we feel that's what's going to keep us safe and keep us loved and keep us liked. And then you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think a lot of people have these combinations as well, and I think that's why I really like you separating this out because I feel that's something that I do too when looking at root causes. I like to separate out, not being invited to sit in that empty seat at the lunch table with people who you wanted to get to know because they say, no, someone's going to sit here and then nobody comes there. That kind of little tiny trauma can stay with you for a long time and impact. So I do also feel like it's important to identify these things because without bringing them to light, you can't really do much about it.
Absolutely. And I think you're so right about the ways that it emerges. We're also in a society that very much rewards these patterns. So even if parents and teachers are really well intentioned, it is things like getting good grades equals this reward in the form of stickers and praise and the little like student of the month awards and things like that. And for some people, they may have gotten things like that and it didn't really hit. They were more interested in, carrying on to their basketball game after school. But for others, for whatever reason, it just really became ingrained. It landed. They went, wow, this is a way that I can get validation. I love this. I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great. So let's move on. I mean, I can go into this for a long time, but I'd like to go into the other parts of the framework because I think that you have valuable things to say about it. So the second part, so the first part of the framework is reveal and heal, reveal the root causes and heal those, and so you can clear them away. But then there is part two, which is restore your sense of safety. And that's, I like to look both externally, like the environment that we work in, and that's where it's important to work in a place where there's psychological safety and all that good stuff. But there's also the inner safety. So one of the things that I notice is with all of these types that you are describing, there's an inner dialogue that goes along with it that is harsh, demanding, and somewhat abusive, really, when people speak out loud the kinds of things that they're thinking about, saying that they say to themselves, who are either ambitious and wanting to get ahead and saying that whatever it is that they fear is going to happen if they don't, like if I don't if I don't show myself well, then I'm not going to get this position. I'm not going to get this raise, or I'm not going to be included on this big project. And then I'm going to kind of be left behind, and then I'm not going to achieve the goals that I have in my mind. So, and that's the type A, right?
That's the type A. It's the perfectionist. It's the people pleasers. It manifests in different ways, but there definitely are these internal dialogues, and we would never talk to other people. Like you said, it would be considered abusive. It would be considered incredibly cruel if we took type A, people pleasing, perfectionist, the thought patterns that we're using on ourselves and put them on other people and said, well, you made this one mistake on this PDF that you sent out. So, X will lead to Y, and then your career is over and you're worthless.
Right.
Like we wouldn't talk to people that way. And yet that's exactly the internal dialogue that starts to happen.
Right. Right. So how do you work with people? I mean, I help point these things out. And then kind of offer other things that people can say instead.
Yeah. So I primarily work with people through speaking and workshops. So I haven't dealt with a lot of it in one-to-one personalized settings. When I do workshops and speaking on these, we talk about some different exercises and habits to implement, some that are for all of these patterns and others that are for each one separately. So one of the things that can be really effective for all of these patterns, type A, people-pleasing, perfectionism, is addressing some changes in thinking that are contributing to and exacerbating stress and potentially contributing to burnout. One of the most common patterns that comes up for all of these types of people is what's called irrational beliefs. And with irrational beliefs, you basically believe that the things you want are necessities. So it's not just, I want to be the best. It's, I have to be the best. It's not just, I want, for a perfectionist, this report to have no errors in it. I want it to a high standard. It must be perfect and free from any punctuation mark out of place. For the people pleaser, it's not just, I want to impress my boss during this meeting. It's, I have to. And if you don't do the things that you've decided you have to do, the feeling is that the result will be catastrophic, world-ending, apocalyptic, career is definitely over, world-shattering kind of catastrophe. And because the consequences that are imagined are so bad, people feel like they can't possibly handle it. So they feel like they won't be able to handle the potential fallout if something goes wrong. And there's also this sense that if you don't get or achieve the things that you feel you have to, then you're value as a person will go down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These thinking patterns put so much extra pressure on us, and they show up as both internal stress in our inner monologue that kicks in and increases our cortisol levels and turns on our amygdalas, so we're panicking, and can also manifest as additional work and additional tasks that we're putting on ourselves. I very frequently have to monitor this in myself because I will assign myself projects and assign myself tasks. I am self-employed and doing a PhD, so most of my work is self-directed. I will assign myself things, decide I have to do it, and freak out about it. And no one but me even knows that the task exists. Like,
Yeah.
nobody asked it of me, and yet I will get it in my head that I have to.
Yes.
So identifying those absolutes in your thinking and in your language is really powerful. If you find yourself thinking, I have to, I must, I need to, it's usually a clue that there is some irrational thinking taking place. And taking a moment to just reflect on that and reframe it as a preference, something that you would like to do, can help to alleviate a lot of pressure and give some gray area. It's not you fail or you excel, it's there's a spectrum of things that might happen. So maybe you feel like you have to get up on stage and impress every single person in the audience, or your speech is just going to be a failure and you will never be hired again. But if you get up and you think, I would like to make a good impression on everyone in the audience. I don't have to, and I understand that there might be a couple people who I'm not their cup of tea. You're still going in with the intention to do a high quality speech and show up, but it takes a lot of the pressure off.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm also thinking of how I used to think, and I still hear this all the time, and I may have said it to my daughter as well. Just always do the best that you can. And I realized after talking with Amanda Crowell, who wrote a book called Great Work, she said, you don't have to do the best that you can do with everything. There are some things that are worthy of that, and there are other things that don't require it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that something that you incorporate into your thinking?
Very much so. I am personally of the opinion that most things don't require your best. And even if they do, you don't get to your best by always trying to deliver your best. So if we
Mm,
look at things like speaking, I'm working on a new keynote right now. That keynote will not become the best it can be by me trying to make it the best. Because if I am always trying to deliver the best on every draft, on every performance, that closes me off from editing, asking for help, getting feedback on it, which is what is actually going to help it become a fantastic performance.
yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you're stating that, because it is so true that we need to give ourselves the grace to be in a process. And the other thing that really, I'll just say, a lot of times writing coaches will say, just do a shitty first draft. You just put something out there without that pressure, without that expectation, and that allows you to be more creative and come up with new ideas. And the other thing is that I think it's an illusion that we get to this place of perfection. Now, obviously, we've got Olympic athletes, we have great performers, and when you do a performance over and over and over, or a talk over and over and over, you get closer and closer to that sense of you understand how every part of it works. But it takes a long time, and I'm not talking about like doing it 3 times. I'm talking about doing it 50 times or 100 times, that one gets to a place where, wow, I really like, this thing is really in my bones, it's in my blood, and I breathe it. And so to expect that kind of perfection on a presentation, if you're doing presentations every week at work, you're not going to get to that place. So we have to have different kinds of expectations.
There's also a saying that you talking about the athletes and getting to, that level where it's ingrained comes to mind. There's a saying my master's supervisor uses. I'm in my PhD now, but I still work with her on some research. She says, "You've got to be good to get lucky." And she'll say this when we're submitting something, we're handing in a proposal, we're handing in a paper. And the idea is basically you can do really good and exceptional work, and we want to. We've written a lot of different iterations, but there's also this element of what are the reviewers looking for? What does an audience member want from your talk? What is their preference? For an athlete, what is the weather like? I used to be a competitive athlete, and there are sometimes factors outside of your control. So you can show up in the best way possible. But sometimes when you see those performances or you see those sporting events where it just is the embodiment of perfection, we've probably all watched an Olympic ice skating routine and gone, wow, there was just nothing that could have gone differently. It's the athletes and it's their preparation. And it's also just a little bit of luck sometimes that kicked in and gave them that extra kick to have that performance that day. Someone in the audience that cheered just right, that made the sound just right, whatever it is. So I think that gives us a little bit of space too to say, I'm going to do my preparation, but there's also a world outside of me that I'm part of. And some of these performances that we've seen that do have that element of perfection, some days the stars do just align, and it's not always the way that people get to
That's
show up.
right. And also sometimes we see it as amazing, and backstage they go, "Oh my god, I really messed up on this thing."
So
So
true.
so I was a performer for 40 years, and so many times people would say, "Oh my god, that was amazing," and we get back into the green room to change and share what people had, reflected back to us, and sometimes we chuckle and we'd say, "Well, yeah, that's what being a good performer is. They don't know all the stuff that we had intended that we didn't do."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I did my first TEDx talk about a month and a half ago, and I accidentally threw my props on the ground during my talk. And since then I've wondered, I'm like, some people know that I wasn't supposed to throw it because they were part of the organizing committee, they were there for rehearsal. But for other people, I've wondered, I'm like, do they know that I wasn't supposed to throw this on the ground? Because I went into it, I accidentally threw the paper on the ground, so I threw the crayon after it for effect. I'm curious. I'm like, I don't know if people, I don't know how obvious it was that it was a mistake.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter. I just trying to think what week is this? Last week, I released an episode on handling mistakes with composure, and that's one thing that people don't know what you plan to do. They may think that it's part of it, or if it's not, they don't register, "Oh, she's a great improviser," but they'll just say, "That was fun.
Yeah.
That was fun. She threw a crayon on the ground." All right. Well, this is really great. So I think that one of the so we're talking now about creating a sense of safety in ourselves, and I think that uh, the takeaways from this, and you can add your own, is number one, you need to be careful about the kind of inner dialogue that you have. And I always, in my book, I have used the best friend technique and say it out loud. And if it doesn't sound like you would say it to your child or to someone you really care about, then it probably doesn't belong in your self-talk. And also, if we really want, this is one of the things that I think about. If we really want something, why work against ourselves? Let's have all of the parts of ourselves be on the same team, working towards the same goal, rather than having a voice of dissent. Now, evaluation is fine, but kind of abusive, if it doesn't feel good to hear,
Mhm.
we it's not helpful.
Yeah, I agree. I love that you call it the best friend technique. I teach it as third party self talk as well, is to take a look at what you're saying to yourself. And if it was coming from a third person, would that be acceptable?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah. If it was a college roommate, would you choose to live with them the next year?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, cultivating that sense of safety in yourself is really important because if you don't have it, then it also, particularly with burnout, can actually change your brain and the way that you are operating and showing up. So, one of the things that we see in adults who become really burnt out, who've been dealing with a high amount of chronic stress, is changes in the connectivity patterns in the brain. And so, what ends up happening is you have less control over your own stress response. Emotional regulation becomes more difficult the longer that people experience burnout, and
Mm,
cortisol levels in the body are more elevated. And because the body really likes consistency and predictability, if your cortisol levels are more elevated, you are more likely to cause yourself stress, whether it's through your thinking patterns or through seeking out people who will reinforce the way that you feel in your body or putting extra work on yourself. So there are biological impacts of not having a sense of safety.
yeah. Wow. That's great. So that's a perfect segue into the third part of the inner freedom framework, which is to repattern your habits.
Yes.
So, how would you use like your techniques, and what do you suggest for people to switch this into something that's more healthful and helpful?
The cool thing about changing our habits is it's really simple to do. It takes time and a lot of intention, so it's not easy, but it's simple. Your brain and your body will adapt to whatever it is that you're doing consistently. So things like cultivating a sense of safety through repatterning and addressing high cortisol levels and diminished connectivity in the brain, all of those things can come back. Your brain and your body can bounce back if you have been really burnt out, if you've experienced type A people pleasing, perfectionist patterns, high levels of burnout, you can recover from that. So I think that's the first place to start. Is nothing is set in stone in this respect. And whatever you do regularly is what your brain and body are going to adapt to. So if you have been neglecting self-care, neglecting to do things like go dancing or do anything that you enjoy, that's what your brain and body is learning. But as soon as you add that back, it may feel uncomfortable at first, but eventually over time, your brain, your body learn to relieve stress. That becomes something that feels more familiar. So you get better at recognizing when you're holding too much stress in your body. If you're incorporating self care and better boundaries, again, it may feel uncomfortable at first. It may feel a little bit weird. Some people experience a lot of boredom when they first start taking care of themselves and setting boundaries because it's so foreign to the body, but you will adapt. And over time, you find more peace if you can get past that boredom, I'm not stressed enough feeling.
That's so interesting. So for instance, let's say people decide, okay, I'm going to walk every day for 20 minutes. And at first they feel really antsy about it because they feel like they're not doing anything. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's exactly things like that. So walking is a great example because people talk about going for walks for mental health and walks as a way to boost the mood. If you want to really effectively relieve stress, then ideally you go for a walk where you're also not combining it with other things. One of the things I see a lot in my work is people take the things that help them to relieve stress and help them feel good and they combine it with work. People will tell me, well, I've been going for my walks. And I will say, well, what are you doing on your walk? And they tell me about the professional development podcasts and books and the brainstorming for work that they're doing. All valuable things, but all turning that walk into part of your work. I'm a big fan of working and walking. I go for what I call work and walks a couple of times a week, but I don't consider those walks part of stress management or self-care for myself. I
Mm,
consider them work and walks.
mhm.
So if you suddenly turn off the noise and say, I am going to go for a 20-minute walk, maybe just some music, background noise for myself, and let myself relieve some tension and feel some calm, that can feel really off putting if it's not familiar. There's
Mm-hmm.
a meme that went around that encapsulated this perfectly a little while ago that was, honey, there's no chaos. It's very unsettling. Like, if we're used to chaos, if we're used to high stress and suddenly there's calm, your brain, your body's like, what did you just do? That is not the same.
Wow. That's great. Okay. So give us a quick list of, I don't know, 3 to 5 things that people can do for self-care and do that kind of stress relief.
So I'm going to give you, instead of a list of things, 3 keys to making stress relief effective.
Okay.
Okay. Because
That's
I think
acceptable.
because I think that people have a good grasp on the different kinds of things you can do: exercise, journaling, talking to people, doodling,
Meditation.
meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how we apply them is where I find people running into the most roadblocks.
Love that.
So the first key is to pick an activity that lets you get tension out, whether it's any of the ones we just talked about. Often, the activities that relieve stress the most effectively involve getting something out of your body. So when you exercise, there's sweat and energy expenditure. When you talk to someone, there's words coming out of your mouth. When you journal, your thoughts are on the page. When you meditate, it's your breath that is elongated and leaving you. So there's this element of something is going out. So that's the first key. Pick something that lets tension out. The second is to limit information in. It's like we just talked about with the taking work on your walk. Give yourself a few minutes. It doesn't have to be the whole walk. It doesn't have to be the whole workout. But give yourself a few minutes to just not take anything new in, not take information about work in, and just allow your own mind to wander and process your day, release your stress. And the third and final key is to lower the barrier to entry. Make it so easy for yourself. If you're not going to go to a 60-minute dance class, you can have a 3-minute dance party in your living room. That still counts. And as far as your body is concerned, that's everything that it needs to accomplish relieving stress. If getting a bullet journal with stickers and glitter pens and all kinds of fancy colors is going to stress you out and feel like too much of a project, I just journal in bullet points. I don't have a fancy journal. And some nights I just doodle or scribble. Some nights I cannot be bothered to put my thoughts into words. And that's okay too. The best way to relieve stress is whatever you're actually going to do.
Love that. Thank you. I think I agree with you. I think that having those frameworks are going to be very useful rather than just picking a particular thing. Yes. I
Yeah,
love
because when we pick the thing, we get stuck on it, and then some days it doesn't work or it doesn't feel right, and we end up stuck in it. And like we talked about, what it really comes down to with repatterning is doing things over time.
Yep. Yep. There's one last thing I'd love to ask you about, and it goes back to one of the patterns from the first part of the framework when we talked about people pleasing. How do you recommend people get over people pleasing and caring what others think?
Yeah. So I think with people pleasing, first off, it's possible that some of it will require deeper work than listening to something like our fabulous podcast episode. Sometimes this work does go back to things like therapy and coaching. So I think that's important to understand.
Yes.
But as a place to start, it's with the small experiments of not doing it. So finding some really lower risk places where you can practice saying no. It might just be you decide going forward when you're having conversations with people, if they say they like something, like a movie or a food, and you don't like it, you're just going to start saying that. If someone is saying, I loved the new Avatar movie and you hated it, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to work on my people pleasing. So I'm going to politely say, oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed it, but it wasn't really for me. Because those little small steps in being ourselves build up. And they provide evidence that the world is not going to end if you disagree with someone or if you don't show up in the way that you think they would like to see it. And then you can get a little bit bigger and you expand and you start to let go of people pleasing on some bigger things, some projects at work that you're going to experiment with saying no to, some breaks from email. You're going to experiment with not checking your email, not living on your email all day, and you will start to see and build up, like I said, evidence that the world will not end if you are true to yourself instead. So that's where you start. You put these small things into practice and then you take the bigger steps.
Wise, very wise. It reminds me of my friend Paula Rizzo, who is a media trainer, coach, and she also has a live stream show. She has a couple of books on productivity called Listful Thinking. She tells a very, very funny story of one of her first jobs where she was asked to go get coffee for everyone in the office, and she hates coffee. She doesn't like the smell of it. And so she purposefully messed up she ordered everyone's drink differently than they asked for it. And after she brought it back to them, they never asked her to get coffee again.
That's another way.
Okay, well, this has been fabulous, Nina. You're so clear, concise, and organized in your thinking. It shows well both your expertise in the topic, but also it speaks well for what you're talking about, because when we are more relaxed and centered and we give ourselves space to think and to just be, we do have more access to the ability of our brains to be more logical. Obviously, I could use some of this. But I'm not a perfectionist, luckily, so I can be okay with it. But I just really appreciate you. That's what I want to say, Nina.
Thank you. Thank you so
And I
much
think
for
that
having me.
this was fabulous. I think people are going to really benefit hugely. I'm going to have all of my clients listen to this episode because it elaborates on the work that we do together, and I think it will give them a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much for being on.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been such a lovely discussion.
And is this Workplace Clarity your .com? Is that where people can find you?
That's me. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at Workplace Clarity. That's my handle on both, or on LinkedIn using my full name, Nina Nesdoly.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much, Nina. And, we are here to help people, as I said, get more comfortable and easeful in their speaking confidence. And so be sure to come back and listen to our upcoming episodes. Have a great day.